I'm joined now by All Rise News' Adam Klasfeld. Adam, we already know that Donald Trump's effort to prosecute Letitia James has kind of gone up in flames, but now his other effort to prosecute another political opponent, James Comey, also seems to be on the rocks. Can you explain what the update is here?
The latest update is that a federal judge just blocked the government from using materials and evidence that it had obtained from Comey's former advisor, Daniel Richman, a friend of his who's a Columbia University law professor, on the grounds that Daniel Richman is likely to prove that these materials, this evidence, was obtained illegally in violation of his Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable search and seizure, and that some of the material might be protected. So, long story short here, they can't use evidence that another judge previously said was at the heart of their case if they want to bring this to a grand jury again.
So it looks like on numerous planks of these prosecutions or lawsuits that the Trump administration is kind of failing to procure evidence in a lawful manner, failing to appoint U.S. attorneys who are actually able to, stay in their roles and bring about these prosecutions. So it looks like kind of every facet of these prosecutions seems to be going up in flames.
That's exactly right. I mean, this is another nail on the coffin of the James Comey investigation. We knew even before this latest ruling by a federal judge in Washington, D.C., that the heart of the government's case that they presented to the grand jury was likely obtained in violation of the Fourth Amendment. Now we have a second federal judge's finding to that effect. Now, this is a preliminary order. We're going to see more about this come to a head this week. The judge may extend her order into a temporary restraining order. This is basically keeping the status quo. But what this means is that if the government wanted to actually try to get this off the ground again, they can't present to a grand jury what another judge described as the heart of the case. So, like I said, another nail in the coffin of a already troubled case.
So where does it stand in terms of the Trump administration's ability to even bring about some prosecution in any which way to get James Comey where they want him?
They can't do it with the evidence that is illegally obtained, likely, according to this ruling. So it just means they're in a holding pattern. They can't do it with Lindsay Halligan, who was unlawfully appointed. They would need to find someone else willing to take this case. And it looks like there's not anyone in the Eastern District of Virginia who's willing to do that. And if they are going ahead with the theory that they went with before, which is that Comey allegedly misled Congress back in 2020, the evidence that they're using at the heart of that is off limits. And yes, this is just for a few days before a broader ruling is obtained, but I'd be very surprised, given the judge's order, if she doesn't extend it again. So it looks like neither of the cases against Comey or James are going forward anywhere fast. I'm just going to read from the ruling because it's a scathing opinion. It says, the court concludes that Petitioner Richman, referring to Daniel Richman here, is likely to succeed on the merits of his claim that the government has violated his Fourth Amendment right against unreasonable searches and seizures by retaining a complete copy of the files on his personal computer, an image of the computer, and searching that image without a warrant. So, we learned a little bit about this earlier, that what happened was the government had originally scanned Daniel Richman's computer back in 2019 and 2020 with a different investigation. That investigation ended without charges, but the government still had the evidence that they kept, they did not return. And in the interim, they decided to search it for looking for different violations without obtaining a different warrant, went beyond the scope of the original warrant. And so this was something that could have come to a head, Brian, in a very embarrassing manner if the case against Comey wasn't dismissed to begin with. Now it looks like they can't even avoid the embarrassment of having the case dismissed. One would think that the Trump DOJ might let sleeping dogs lie so the constitutional violations wouldn't come to a head. It looks like they're coming to a head anyway.
Right. How does the statute of limitations play into things here?
So the statute of limitations, at least Comey's attorneys are arguing, have expired, and that seems to make sense. The case is based on statements he made in September 2020. We are now in December 2025. It's a 5-year statute of limitations. What that would mean is if the indictment was void, if there was never a valid indictment, that means a statute of limitations wasn't told. Now, I will just a little asterisk to that. You know, the government is going to argue that they have a 6-month grace period after the filing of an indictment. But once again, the question remains, was an indictment dismissed or was the indictment void before it was brought because one person was in the grand jury room presenting it, her name was Lindsay Halligan, and she was never lawfully in that position.
You had mentioned before that they are having trouble finding some U.S. attorney from the Eastern District of Virginia to fill Lindsay Halligan's place. What if they find, some hack prosecutor from some other jurisdiction that's willing to sign on to this thing? Does it have to be from the Eastern District of Virginia?
Well, that's what we saw happening already in the Letitia James case, because in the recent adventure into the grand jury room of an out-of-district line prosecutor, they brought someone from out of district, but you know what? There's another check and balance in the system, and that's the grand jury. And the grand jury said no, they rejected it. And so, sure, they can try to find someone out of district, some sort of loyalist that they shove into the grand jury room and say, follow these instructions. But they're going to have to present a case to a grand jury. And in the case of James Comey, they're going to have to do it without what the other judge called the heart of the case.
I mean, doesn't it kind of undermine the Trump administration's own case when they can't find a prosecutor within that district who's even willing to sign his or her name on the indictment? The fact that they have to go to Missouri or North Carolina, which were the cases with these Comey and James cases that had already previously been brought, like, doesn't that in and of itself kind of serve as a demerit against the administration's case, the fact that they can't find anybody in district willing to bring this indictment?
I think the public knows what's going on. To your point, Brian, the fact that they can't do it shows just how tenuous or empty that this case was. As a matter of fact, one of the things that is almost stupefying, that they really should let sleeping dogs lie here. According to reporting, there exists a memo saying not only why the case wasn't going to go anywhere, but why it raises ethical concerns. So why isn't someone from the Eastern District of Virginia taking this up? Well, maybe they value their law license. Maybe they don't want to get disciplined. And if that memo exists in the way that it's been reported, this is not only a demerit in the public eye. Anyone who's willing to touch this case really better beware, because this is kind of explosive.
Well, can you talk about that a little bit? To what extent have law licenses been at imminent risk because these prosecutors have been just kind of willing to debase themselves on Trump's behalf?
Well, we saw after the 2020 election, a long line of Trump lawyers lost their licenses. They got disciplined. They got disbarred from the cases with Rudy Giuliani and other lawyers. We all saw what happened in the wake of the 2020 presidential election.
John Eastman, Jenna Ellis.
Exactly.
I can't remember if Jeffrey Clark had been disbarred or lost his law license.
There were absolutely disciplinary proceedings against him as well. I think that is why you can't find a single prosecutor from the Eastern District of Virginia willing to do this. And look, we had very recently a number of bar complaints being filed by an advocacy group called Campaign for Accountability. Now, the Virginia bar declined to take the case on the grounds that this was still in the courts and that we will take up an investigation, will initiate an investigation if it's found that some misconduct took place. Now, the group thinks that's passing the buck and that's the wrong way to go. But it goes to show, careful what they wish for. If they revive this case and there's a real finding of misconduct on the record, that can really blow up in their faces.
There's also been instances where even the Trump administration itself was just hit with like $1 million in sanctions. So clearly the disdain that this administration has for the justice system is they're overt about it. And so do you think that is having some impact on the presumption of regularity that these judges are giving to this White House? This idea that, okay, we're going to confer goodwill onto the DOJ and assume that they're acting in good faith because it's the DOJ. It's an institution that has for decades been telling the truth when we ask for facts. But recognizing now how they operate, do you think that that's dissipating?
Oh, absolutely. And we're seeing it happen across the country where judges are saying outright that the presumption of regularity has been entirely destroyed. To your point, that $1 million sanction order, that was upheld very recently by the 11th Circuit against Trump and his former lawyer turned U.S. Attorney Alina Habba. Yeah. As a matter of fact, it was a double whammy against Alina Habba because just days after the 11th Circuit upheld the sanction against her and Trump for the frivolous lawsuit, I think folks might remember a couple of years ago, it was a sprawling racketeering lawsuit claiming that the investigation of the Trump campaign's ties to the Kremlin was a giant racketeering conspiracy. Well, that lawsuit lit up in flames. It ended in a $1 million sanction for filing a frivolous lawsuit, recently upheld by the 11th Circuit days before the 3rd Circuit found that Alina Habba was unlawfully appointed and disqualified her.
Last question here. Do you think that the fact that the Trump administration is having so little luck in these cases, in these vindictive prosecutions, these selective prosecutions against Letitia James, against James Comey, now that's going to have some impact on their willingness to engage in more? Or do you think it no skin off their back, if it means that they can get some vengeance on Trump's opponents, that's his priority, regardless of whether or not he's able to succeed?
I think the purpose of these lawsuits is harassment, pure and simple. And it's, it almost doesn't matter what the outcome is. And that's not just an opinion on my part. That's what Trump said to reporters that bring the case. If there's a conviction, there's not a conviction, at least you've charged. Yeah. And I think that's the win for Trump. If it makes anyone think twice, if it makes anyone think, well, do I want to spend money on a defense attorney? Do I want to risk the even unlikely chance of prison under these bogus charges? I think it sends a message of fear, and I think that's what Trump is going for, by his own words.
We'll leave it there. For those who are looking to support the invaluable work that Adam does, whether it's talking to me in a setting like this, or just a few days ago when he was at a courthouse in upstate New York, in Albany, covering the Letitia James prosecution, this is what independent journalism looks like. So I'm going to put a link to All Rise News right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. If you'd like to support fearless independent journalism, please support Adam's work. Adam, as always, thanks so much for the time.
Thanks always again, Brian. Always great talking to you.